First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
There is no God, and she is always with you. What do I mean by that? Well, our reality, the reality that we live our lives in, the only reality possible, is populated with concepts. Reality has houses and streets and cups and chairs and trees and stars, ourselves and other people in it, which is to say, we have concepts of those things. Reality also has abstract things, like the number 7, abstracted out from any particular collection of 7 objects and just there before our minds in its pure sevenness. Reality has abstract things like freedom and love, like greed and anger and ignorance, like music and the rule of law, also abstracted out from any particular example and present to mind as a concept of what all members of a set of examples have in common. Reality has some things even more abstract, like the square root of -1, which is not a real number. It's an imaginary number, but it's part of our reality. Other imaginary things, like unicorns and dragons and Harry Potter, are also among the concepts that populate our reality. Most of us know who Huckleberry Finn is. We understand that our concept of him is in the category of fictional characters, but he exists for us as a concept nonetheless. But part of the concept of God is that God is way beyond the capacity of our limited, finite human minds to conceive. Whatever your concept of God is, it's wrong, because it's just one more limited, finite human concept. The concept of God thus cancels itself out as a concept. If I ask you to think of something that's unthinkable, you can't do it. Think something that not only you now today cannot think, but that no human or collection of humans jointly will ever be able to think. You can't do that, of course, because if you could, it wouldn't be unthinkable. So we can have no concept of such a thing. Reality is populated with concepts, even concepts of fictional and imaginary things, but the concept that can't be conceived is not among them. It can't be a part of our reality, cannot be invoked as an explanation, can't be prayed to or cursed, can't interact with us or our world. And that's how I would unpack the first part, there is no God. At the same time, there is always something with us that is just outside our capacity to think it. We might want to call it the mystery, but even the name mystery is a concept. For that matter, always with you is a concept too, yet I think it is inescapable. If, as noted, our thought, our understanding, our awareness, our love is limited and finite, yet also growing, or at least evolving and changing, then there's always that toward which our aspiration may be pointed, even if we can't quite conceive of what it is. It's a something, and it's always there. And it is fertile and fecund, and it bears new life, so I call it she. So I wanted to put that out there at the outset. I'll be circling back to that as we explore today our fifth source, Humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and results of science and warn us against idolatries of mind and spirit. First, then, I want to celebrate our humanist tradition, which continues to inform who we are as Unitarian Universalists. The 1933 Humanist Manifesto, from which Louise shared in our reading today, was very much a product of developing Unitarian thought. A key moment, perhaps we might say the beginning, of American religious humanism, or at least the first coming together of the people who, working together, would systematically develop and spread American religious humanism, happened 15 years earlier than the 1933 Manifesto. It happened in 1918, and it happened right here in Des Moines, Iowa. The minister of this congregation back then was Reverend Curtis Reese. He had been preaching from this pulpit I am now honored to occupy some of the ideas that would later come to be identified as humanist, though Rees wasn't calling it that then. This Des Moines congregation hosted the 1918 gathering of the Western Unitarian Conference, and a minister from Minneapolis named John Dietrich came down for the event. Dietrich and Rees got to talking, and they discovered that they had each been developing a conception of religion without God. Dietrich called it humanism, and that's the name that stuck. Through the years that followed, Dietrich and Rees collaborated in developing, promoting, and organizing the humanist movement that culminated in the 1933 Humanist Manifesto. That Humanist Manifesto of 1933 had 33 original signatories, 15 of whom were Unitarian Universalist ministers, including Dietrich and Rees. One Universalist minister was a signatory, as were 17 other prominent public intellectuals who had been brought on board with the project. When I reread that manifesto, I am stirred and moved by the boldness of these humanists 91 years ago, by their vision and their hope. The implicit critique of traditional religion, which for them pretty much meant Christianity, is valid. The West's religious tradition is often not harmonized well with the understandings emerging through the work of scientists. The West's religious tradition has sometimes obstructed rather than aided progress in addressing modern social problems. It has often separated people rather than bringing them together. And so the humanists said, let's do religion. Religions have always been means for realizing the highest values of life, and we need that. But let's have religion without God. Today, we still live in a world where people plant bombs on themselves, in cars, in buildings, fly jet airliners into buildings, and are led to do so in a way that is enmeshed with their understanding about what they call God. Today, we still live in a world where people want to take away women's reproductive freedom and punitively stigmatize gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, and their thinking makes heavy and frequent reference to something they call God. Today, we still live in a world where our children are liable to be told by their classmates that they are going to hell. Today, we still live in a world where a few people make it their life's mission to devise elaborate refutations of evolution, and where more than a few people work to change the public school science curricula to present as science their views about something they call God. Today, we still live in a world where our own experience of many religious institutions is that their devotion to something they call God goes hand in hand with authoritarianism. They don't allow questioning, don't allow critical thinking, demand uncritical acceptance of authority. They say that the authority is a book, but the perceptive quickly see that the authority really is a community of human leaders who have settled on one interpretation of that book, when the book itself, equally well or better, supports different readings. Today, we still live in a world where we see that faith so often means believe what the authority figure tells you to believe and pray what the authority figure tells you to pray. Today, we still live in a world where countries that social scientists measure as high on religiosity, venerating something they call God, those societies also measure higher on violence, drug and alcohol addiction, teen pregnancy, imprisonment rates, and high school dropout rates. No wonder it would seem important to humanists 91 years ago as well as today to call for a religion that doesn't have this thing called God in it. In recent years, we've seen a real renaissance in religious humanism, even though it is often not labeled that. Try typing spiritual atheism into your favorite search engine, and you'll find that there's a lot out there exploring and developing the idea of religion and spirituality without God. It's a new atheism, much of which sprang up in the wake of the new atheism. The new atheism, as it was called, refers to a spate of books grouped together that came out about 20 years ago. These included Sam Harris, The End of Faith, 2004, Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion, 2006, Daniel Dennett, Breaking the Spell, 2006, and Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, 2007. These books derided belief in God and also despised faith, spirituality, religion, and religious institutions. And then, about a decade later, there was another round of books that also touted atheism, but didn't want to deride anything. While still disbelieving in God, these authors explicitly valued faith, spirituality, and religion. These included Chris Stedman's Faithist: How an Atheist Found Common Ground with the Religious, 2013. Alain de Botton, Religion for Atheists, A Believer's Guide to the Uses of Religion, also 2013. If that first round of books constituted the new atheism, then this next wave might be called the new atheism. The new atheists argue that atheists, instead of deriding religion, should steal from it, because, as de Botton says, the world's religions are packed with good ideas on how we might live and arrange our societies. I will pick up from there after our interlude, something independent and humanist. Faith, as Karen Armstrong points out, in the New Testament is the Greek word "sitsis," which means trust, loyalty, engagement, commitment. When Jesus calls for greater faith, he's not calling for people to cling harder to a set of propositional beliefs. He's calling for engagement and commitment. Spirituality, as growing numbers of spiritual atheists are saying, is not about spirit stuff as opposed to material stuff. It's about claiming the depths of awe and wonder, serenity and compassion, abundance and acceptance, indissoluble union with the great all, and of belonging to the universal. The idea of connecting with the religious impulse rather than denying it is just what the Humanist Manifesto called for 91 years ago. And speaking of good ideas that we can draw from the traditional faith traditions, one of those ideas, which is in fact a staple of Christian theology going back centuries, is that there is no God. Yes, that's right. John Scotus Erigena, a 9th century Christian theologian, made an argument somewhat similar to the one with which I started this sermon. Erigena wrote, "We do not know what God is. God himself doesn't know what he is, because he is not anything. Literally, God is not because he transcends being." Got that? This is a Christian theologian saying God does not exist. Erigena also says God isn't non-existent in the way that, say, my Ferrari is non-existent. Rather, God simply transcends the category of existence and non-existence, being and non-being. To understand this, Let's look again at that fifth source of the living tradition we Unitarian Universalists share. Humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. It might seem a little strange that this reference to idolatry is in there. Warning against idolatry is probably not among the first things that come to mind when you think of humanism. Or when you think of the repudiation of idolatry, your first thought probably wouldn't be humanism. Your first thought would more likely be the first of the 10 commandments, or the first 2 commandments, depending on which tradition is doing the counting. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. What's the big deal about graven images, you may wonder? Historically, it seems to have been a tribal thing. The neighboring tribes made statues and represented their deities, so the Hebrew people, to be distinctive, insisted on having no deity statuary, nor, for that matter, any angel statuary, nor things in the earth statuary, or things in the water under the earth statuary, no figurines of elephants or parrots or fish, none of that. For the ancient Hebrew people, this was part of how one affirmed one's loyalty to the tribe. They said, we're the people who don't do that, so don't do that. It may have started that way, but then a funny thing happened on the way to the temple. The sanction against idolatry ended up pointing the Hebrew people towards something more important than statuary. Just as a statue is a fixed and static, unchanging thing, a person might also have certain ideas, beliefs, concepts that become fixed and static. The commandment against idols evolved so that it was understood to be not just about statues, figurines, and graven images. It's about any concept or thought pattern that's become fixed and rigid. By abjuring graven images, the Hebrew people were subtly reoriented toward a conception of God as dynamic, unfolding, always beyond whatever you can imagine, always other than anything you think. The divine creative movement of the universe is dynamic and changing. Human understanding is ever unfolding. Idolatry means clinging to a fixed, static conception, closing ourselves off to new learning. Thus, we see that it actually is quite apt for this mention of idolatry to be included in our humanist source. The guidance of reason and the results of science continually overturn our idols, challenge what we think we know. Moreover, this is really the point I think John Scotus Erigena was on about. Anytime someone says God exists, she has some idea of what this God is that exists. And that's problematic because any concept at all, if you're stuck on it, is an idol. As soon as you have an idea of God, any idea, smash that idol and return to a stance of total openness to whatever the world might present to you without forcing it into one or another of your preconceived conceptual categories. This is humanist teaching, warning us against idolatries of mind and spirit. Don't even make an idol of your own past statements or belief. If you find yourself saying things that contradict other things you've earlier said, that's okay. Emerson said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And Whitman said, do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. In a sermon I gave last March called The Ontological, the Semantic, and the Tribal, I suggested the core uses of the word God were to point to any or all of the following: community-forming power, love, the greatest source of beauty, mystery, or creativity, the widest or deepest inspiration to gratitude, humility, wonder, and awe, origin, any ultimate context and basis for meaning, value, ethics, or commitment, the widest reality to which our loyalty is owed, the cosmos. But all of those, too, are concepts that could become idols. By saying God, we are also saying more than all of these definitions, or rather, maybe less. We're saying that, while at the same time whispering, but remember, also not that. By saying God, we are invoking a tradition which, for all its abuses and its nonsense, also includes the reminder that our ideas are inadequate. A tradition which calls us to smash our idols. A tradition that says there is more there than our words can say. So much more that even our truest words are also false to the fullness of the mystery within which we live and breathe and have our being. There is no God. That is, there is no possible concept that can encapsulate all of the wonder and the paradox that is this dear life. The wonder and the paradox that is directly staring us in the face every moment, saying, hey, you, knock over the idols of what you think you know and wake up. Whatever you think you know, this moment has something new and fresh to teach you. Are you listening? Are you looking? Always. For there is no God, and she is always with you, whispering, pay attention. Amen.